The kindest person in the room is the most dangerous person to betray. Most people never figure that out until it's too late. They mistake patience for weakness. They mistake silence for acceptance. They think someone who keeps forgiving, keeps showing up, keeps understanding, and will do it forever. That assumption destroys relationships. Here's what most people never see. The person absorbing your anger, forgiving your lies, making excuses for your behavior, they're not doing it because they can't leave. They're doing it because they choose to stay. And there is an enormous, terrifying difference between those two things. They are not confused. They are watching. Every broken promise and cataloged. Every manipulation recorded. Every time your actions contradicted your words, filed away permanently. They said nothing, but they missed nothing. And somewhere inside that person, beneath all that patience, beneath all that forgiveness, beneath all that grace, there is a line, a threshold. A point of no return that most people never even know exists until they've already crossed it. And crossing it doesn't trigger an explosion. It triggers silence. No argument, no warning, no final chance. Just a quiet, permanent, irreversible disappearance from someone who once gave you everything. That is what we're talking about today. The kindest person in the room is the most dangerous person to betray. Most people never figure that out. And the ones who don't, they pay for it in ways they never expected. We have been sold a completely backwards idea about empathy. From the time we were children, the message was consistent. Kind people are gentle people. Gentle people are safe people. Safe people can be pushed, tested, stretched, because they will always find a way to understand. They will always find a reason to forgive. They will always come back. That idea sounds reasonable on the surface, but it is one of the most dangerous misunderstandings a human being can carry into a relationship. Because here is what nobody tells you about the person who keeps forgiving you. Every time they forgive, they are not resetting to zero. They are absorbing the damage and carrying it forward. Quietly, privately, without making a scene. Without sending you a bill. Without even letting you know the account exists. But the account exists. And it has been open since the very first time you made them feel like their feelings didn't matter. Think about the people in your life who never raised their voice at you. The ones who stayed calm when you were unreasonable. The ones who listened when you vented. Who showed up when you needed them. Who defended you to people who spoke badly about you behind your back. The ones who always seemed to find the generous explanation for your worst behavior. Most people look at that person and think, they're fine. They're always fine. They're the strong one. But strength and silence are not the same thing. What you were actually watching was someone in the middle of an internal war you had no access to. Someone processing your actions at a depth you probably never went to yourself. Someone who felt the weight of every broken promise, not just emotionally, but physically, spiritually, in a way that accumulated inside their body over time. Empaths do not experience life on the surface. They experience it in layers. When you lied to them, they didn't just feel the sting of the lie. They felt the fear that drove you to lie. They understood the insecurity underneath it. They forgave the behavior because they saw the wound behind it. That is not weakness. That is an extraordinary level of human perception that most people will never develop. But here is the brutal truth about that perception. It works in both directions. The same sensitivity that allowed them to understand your pain also recorded every single moment you chose not to protect theirs. It noticed the exact tone of your voice when you were being dismissive. It registered the precise moment you stopped putting in effort. It tracked the pattern of your behavior long before your behavior became an obvious problem. They were not confused about what was happening. They were hoping they were wrong. That is the part that breaks people when they finally understand it. The empath was not oblivious. They were not naive. They were not too blind to see the reality of the situation. They saw it clearly, sometimes from the very beginning, and they stayed anyway because they genuinely believed in the possibility of who you could become. They chose you at your worst, hoping you would eventually choose them back. And when you didn't, when the pattern became impossible to explain away, when the hope finally ran out, something shifted inside them. Not dramatically, not visibly, just permanently. And that shift is where everything changes. That shift is exactly what we need to understand. Empathy is not a feeling. It is a skill. And like every skill, in the right hands, it becomes something most people are completely unprepared for. We need to stop thinking about empathic people the way movies and television taught us to think about them. The soft-spoken character. The one who cries easily. The one who gets taken advantage of and never fights back. That image is not just inaccurate, it is dangerously misleading. Because the empathic people who have actually done the internal work, who have survived real emotional pain, who have carried other people's burdens for years without recognition, those people develop something that cannot be taught in any classroom. They develop the ability to read human behavior at a level most people don't even know exists. Think about what years of deep emotional observation actually produces in a person. Think about someone who has spent their entire life paying close attention to the gap between what people say and what people do. Someone who noticed from a very young age that people's words and people's actions rarely told the same story. Someone who learned through repeated personal experience that the truth about a person never lives in their explanations, and it lives in their patterns. That person does not process the world the way most people do. They are not listening to your words and taking them at face value. They are watching your micro-expressions. They are registering the slight hesitation before your answer. They are noticing what you chose not to say. They are comparing what you told them today against what you told them 3 months ago. And they are doing all of this automatically, effortlessly, in real time, while appearing completely calm on the outside. That is not emotional fragility. That is one of the most sophisticated forms of human intelligence that exists. The confusion comes because empathy looks soft from the outside. When an empath listens to you without judgment, it feels like acceptance. When they stay calm during conflict, it feels like they have no power in the situation. When they forgive quickly, it feels like the slate was wiped clean. But none of those observations are accurate. What you are actually sitting across from is someone who is gathering information at a speed and depth you are probably not aware of. Someone whose nervous system is picking up signals your behavior is broadcasting without your permission. Someone who already knows more about your emotional architecture than you have consciously shared because you revealed it in the spaces between your words, in the moments you thought nobody was paying that close attention. They were paying attention. They are always paying attention. This is why behavioral framing matters so deeply when we talk about empaths. Because the moment you reframe empathy from a passive emotional trait into an active observational skill, everything about how you understand these people changes. They are not just feeling their way through life. They are reading it constantly, precisely, with a level of accuracy that accumulates over time the longer they know you. And here is what that means in the context of a relationship. Every version of yourself you have ever shown them, the generous version, the selfish version, the honest version, the deceptive version, all of it has been received, processed, and stored with emotional clarity most people cannot match. They have seen you at your most unguarded moments. They cataloged those moments not to use against you, but because that is simply how they experience the world. The question that should make every person uncomfortable is this. If someone has been reading you that accurately, that consistently for that long, what exactly do they already know about you? There is something nobody warns you about when you are in a relationship with an empath. There is a line, not a visible one, not one they will announce, not one that comes with a warning sign or a final ultimatum or a dramatic conversation where everything gets laid out clearly on the table. Just a line. And the terrifying thing about that line is that most people cross it without ever knowing it existed. They cross it quietly, casually, in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday. Not through some massive betrayal, not through a single explosive moment, but through something far more subtle and far more permanent, through repetition, through the slow accumulated weight of choosing themselves over and over again at the expense of someone who kept choosing them anyway. That is how the line gets crossed. Not with a knife, with 1,000 tiny paper cuts that the empath absorbed silently and alone. Now here is where the psychology becomes genuinely fascinating. Because most people operate under a very specific assumption when it comes to conflict and relationships. They believe that tension builds visibly. They believe that when something is wrong, the other person will show it. They will become louder, more reactive, more emotional. They will make their pain known because that is what most people do when they are hurting. They externalize it. They let it spill outward so the other person feels the pressure and responds. But empaths do not work that way. The tension inside an empath does not move outward. It moves inward. It compresses. It layers. It builds beneath the surface in a way that produces no visible warning signs to someone who is not paying close enough attention. On the outside, the empath may still be showing up, still responding, still present in the physical sense. But something underneath has already begun shifting in a direction that cannot be reversed simply by being nicer, by apologizing, by suddenly deciding to show effort that was absent for months. Because timing matters enormously in human psychology. Effort that arrives after the emotional damage is done does not repair the damage. It simply confirms that the effort was always available. and was withheld until it became necessary for the other person's comfort, not offered freely out of genuine care. The empath registers that difference instantly. They feel the distinction between someone who is changing because they grew and someone who is performing change because they are about to lose something they took for granted. And that distinction is everything. This is what creates the specific psychological tension that surrounds empaths in their closest relationships. The people around them often have no accurate read on where the empath actually is emotionally. They are working with outdated information. They are still operating based on the version of the empath who tolerated everything, who always came back, who could always be reached with the right combination of words and temporary effort. But that version has been quietly dying for a long time. The empath has already had the conversations internally that most people never get to have out loud. They have already sat with the reality of the situation. They have already grieved the relationship in private. They have already imagined the future with this person and felt the exhaustion of what continuing would actually cost them. And they have done all of this completely invisibly, while still showing up, while still being present, while still giving the relationship more than it deserved. That internal process is what makes the eventual silence so final. Because by the time most people realize something is genuinely wrong, not surface level wrong, but permanently wrong, the empath has already arrived at a conclusion. Quietly, thoroughly, without drama, and conclusions reached that deeply are almost impossible to undo. The tension was never going to announce itself loudly. It was always going to arrive in complete silence. And silence in this context is not the beginning of a problem. It is the end of one. Let me tell you something about the way an empath sees you. Not the way they describe you to other people. Not the way they talk about you when the relationship is good and everything feels warm and connected. I mean the way they actually see you, underneath the version of yourself you present to the world. Underneath the personality you have carefully constructed over years of social experience, underneath the image you have become comfortable projecting to people who don't look too closely. An empath looks closely. Always. And what they see is not what most people expect to be seen. They see the version of you that appears for exactly 3 seconds when something catches you off guard. They see the flash of insecurity behind your confidence. They see the loneliness underneath your social comfort. They see the fear that lives directly behind your anger, the need for validation hiding inside your indifference, the childhood wound that still controls your adult decisions in ways you have probably never fully admitted to yourself. They see all of it, not because they are trying to expose you, not because they are collecting ammunition, but because that is simply how they receive people. They do not experience human beings on the surface. They experience them in full depth all at once, whether they want to or not. And here is what that does to a relationship over time. When someone sees you that completely, when someone holds the full picture of who you actually are, including the parts you hide from everyone else, and they choose to stay, choose to love you, choose to show up consistently despite seeing your worst alongside your best, that is not something most people know how to receive properly. Most people, when faced with that level of being truly seen, do one of two things. They either rise toward it, become more honest, more open, more willing to be genuine because for the first time in their life someone made genuine feel safe, or they panic. They feel exposed. They feel like the empath has too much access, too much understanding, too much quiet power in the relationship. And instead of leaning into the safety of being known, they begin to pull away, to create distance, to manufacture conflict that keeps the empath slightly off balance, because off balance feels safer than completely vulnerably seen. That second response is where the damage begins, because the empath feels that shift immediately. They feel the moment you stopped leaning in and started pulling back. They feel the exact point where your energy changed, where your presence became slightly hollow, where your words started carrying less weight because your actions stopped matching them. They registered that transition in real time, processed it quietly, and continued showing up anyway, because that is what they do. They stay present even when presence is painful. But here is the identity component that most people completely miss in this dynamic. The empath is not just mirroring your emotions back to you. They are holding a version of you that is more complete and more honest than the version you hold of yourself. They remember who you were in your most genuine moments. They remember the conversations where your defenses dropped and something real came through. They remember the version of you that existed before you decided being guarded was safer than being honest. And they grieve that version of you long before they grieve the relationship itself. That is the part that separates this experience from ordinary heartbreak. The empath is not just losing a person. They are losing the version of that person they always believed was possible. The version that existed in brief, real, unguarded moments. The version that felt like it was almost ready to fully arrive and never did. They held on to the truest version of you longer than you held on to it yourself. And when they finally release it, when they finally accept that the person they believed in is not coming, the grief is enormous. But so is the clarity. Because once an empath releases the image of who you could have been, they see with complete accuracy who you actually chose to be. And that clarity is where their power fully returns to them. Here is the part of this conversation that most people are not prepared for. Because everything we have discussed up until this point, the patience, the forgiveness, the silent observation, the deep emotional processing, all of it has been building toward a single moment. A moment that completely redefines who holds the power in this dynamic. And it is not the moment most people expect. Most people assume the power in a relationship belongs to the person who cares less. That is the conventional wisdom. The one who needs less, wants less, feels less, they hold the leverage. They set the terms. They control the pace. And for a long time, watching an empath absorb pain without reacting, forgive without being asked, stay without being given a reason to stay, it can look like the empath is the powerless one in the equation. That assumption is completely wrong. And the moment it gets corrected is one of the most psychologically significant shifts a human relationship can produce. Because here is what was actually happening during all those months or years of patience and forgiveness and silent emotional labor. The empath was not losing power. They were accumulating it. Every moment they chose understanding over reaction, they were developing clarity. Every moment they absorbed pain without breaking, they were building an internal threshold that most people will never reach. Every moment they stayed when leaving would have been easier. They were making a conscious decision, and conscious decisions repeated over time produce an unshakable sense of self that cannot be manipulated away once it fully forms. That is what people miss entirely. They see the forgiveness and think vulnerability. They see the patience and think weakness. They see the continued presence and think dependence. But what they are actually watching is someone doing the hardest psychological work a human being can do. Choosing deliberately, feeling fully, and remaining grounded while absorbing enormous amounts of emotional pressure. That is not weakness. That is the specific internal architecture that produces the most permanent and irreversible kind of personal power there is. And when the shift finally happens, when the empath reaches the point where self-preservation becomes louder than compassion, that power activates completely. Not gradually. Not partially. Completely. Suddenly, the person who always responded stops responding. Suddenly, the person who always explained themselves stops explaining. Suddenly, the person who always made themselves available becomes completely unreachable. And the people around them scramble. They try the old approaches. They try guilt. It doesn't land. They try manipulation. It slides off. They try the silent treatment. The empath doesn't chase. They try sudden warmth and renewed effort. The empath observes it with clear eyes and feels almost nothing. Not because they became cold, but because they finally became free. This is the power shift that people never see coming because they were too busy assuming the empath's capacity for love meant an unlimited capacity for mistreatment. They confused depth of feeling with absence of limits. They confused emotional generosity with emotional surrender. But generosity has always had a source. And when the source decides to redirect, when the empath consciously chooses to pour that enormous emotional capacity into themselves, into their own healing, their own peace, their own carefully chosen relationships, the transformation is complete and it is stunning. The person who once carried everyone becomes someone nobody can move without permission. The person who once chased connection becomes someone others chase without success. The person who once begged to be valued becomes someone whose presence alone communicates value without a single word being spoken. Because real power was never about controlling other people. Real power is complete indifference to being controlled. And once an empath learns that, truly learns it, not intellectually, but in their bones, through lived experience and survived pain, nobody gets that access again without earning it completely. They are no longer available to everyone. They are now only available to those who prove they deserve to be there.